Hello, welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. I like terrible things. I like poorly written, badly acted movies. I like movies that have wonderful budgets and incredible quality that just weren't done very well. I like movies that weren't done well at any level or complete failures because I like watching. It's kind of like I like movies like people like NASCAR. You don't go to watch left turns being made all day. Someone's eventually going to crash. I like that whole going to see the movies like you sniff the milk to make sure that it's bad. I've wondered where this influence came from, and I think I can track it back. Last time I talked about some of the influences, the Speed Racer, the Knight Rider, the Battle of the Planets. But when I think about what makes me love really, really bad movies, horrible writing, poor acting, things that just don't make any sense, I think I can name the culprit. And the culprit is the Super Friends. Little history. My exposure to superheroes came at a very young age with the Superman Aquaman Hour of Adventure by Filmation that started in 1967. Uh, Limited animation production of Superman, Batman, Aquaman. They expanded it out to include other members of the Justice League, Green Lantern, Hawkman, The Flash. And I loved those. I can still hear the incidental music in my head some days when I'm bored. Um, they didn't use any of the actual DC villains for these shows, but invented new ones, some of which were actually kind of terrifying. Torpedo Man from the Aquaman series particularly comes to mind. I had nightmares that had him in it. And then, having had that exposure, I read comic books and this is the early 70s, so comic books were a little toned down from what we're used to even 10 years ago, certainly more toned down than what we are used to today. Um, and then, of course, oh my gosh, 1973, the Super Friends. I was glued to the TV set. Every Saturday morning, my dad would make some kind of nice breakfast when he was around and able to do it, usually Swedish pancakes. But by the time he had the batter going in the pan, I was already in front of the television watching the Super Friends. The first season, Batman and Robin, Superman, Aquaman and Wonder Woman, and Wendy and Marvin. And of course, Wonder Dog. Because you're going to talk about Wendy and Marvin, you have to have Wonder Dog. And these were not traditional comic book adventures. These were so toned down that you could have replaced the superheroes in them with any four characters from anything, and the stories would have gone exactly the same. But it was special because they were using the Super Friends. The plot of every episode. Somebody is doing something terrible to the Earth, probably environmentally. The Super Friends stumble around like cats with their heads in bags, trying to find exactly what happens when Wendy discovers through something she learned in high school physics that day the clue that leads to finding the bad guy. The Super Friends confront the bad guy, usually having to break a robot or bend a wall or something, and then confront the bad guy with the fact that what he's doing may be for good purposes, but he's hurting people. At which point the bad guy goes, "I'm being a dick," and stops. That was it. That was every episode of the first season of Super Friends. The villain pretty much understood at the end that they had been doing something bad, apologized for it, and then they all got together and fixed the problem. It wasn't the wham bam pow that I've been used to, but it was the Super Friends. That's a terrible way to write superheroes. It really is. writing them not able to actually use any of their superpowers on bad guys, and then everyone gets around and agrees to why the bad guy had been doing things incorrectly, including the bad guy at the end. It was a different time. 1973 was a time when a lot of social consciousness was being brought to children's programming, and yeah, it was different. Then 19 that series lasted from 1973 1974. Of course, they replayed it in syndication forever. Uh, it only lasted a year because of the writing, I think. Then we got 1977, the all new Super Friends Hour. They expanded things a little bit. They started bringing in more DC villains and more Wham Bam Pow. And the writing was terrible. I want to say that it wasn't the worst writing out there, but it really, really was. Because the writers, for some reason, would latch onto some zeitgeist, something from the modern culture that was supposedly really popular with the kids, and shoehorn Super Friends into it. Seriously, a scientist would vanish from the surface of the planet because he'd created this interdimensional travel device, and the Super Friends followed him, and he was on Tatooine. They had to go to a starport bar and argue with Jawas to get him back. They might have changed the names a little bit, but those were Jawas, and that was Mos Eisley. They were on Tatooine. They ripped off Lord of the Rings. They had scrapped Marvin and Wendy and Wonder Dog by this point in time, three non-powered characters who only contributed comic relief and the occasional clue that solves everything, and replaced them with Zan and Jaina and their space monkey Gleek, the Wonder Twins, which are actually really good characters with their own unique powers. Easy to mock. Jaina could turn into any animal, and Zan could turn into anything made of water, and Gleek was comic relief. Turning into something made of water was really easy for them to write in the early part of the series. He'd be a bucket of water so that Jaina as a eagle could carry him to the next adventure, or he could be a sheet of ice to slip someone up, or a wall made out of water to protect people from radiation. But then, as the writing got lazier, he could become an ice knight and joust people, or an ice rocket. And I don't know the physics on that one. There were problems. That series also lasted a year, 1977 and 1978. And it started to provide real gems of bad writing. Then came Challenge of the Super Friends, 1978, 1979. And this is the one that everyone thinks about when they think about the Super Friends. When you hear about the Super Friends, you remember when you had all these Super Friends and the roster got huge. Superman, Batman and Robin, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Apache Chief, and Samurai, and people who had never existed in comics before. They created for a little diversity. But you also had these horrible villains gathered together from the cosmic reaches of the universe. Lex Luthor and Gorilla Grodd and Sinestro and Giganta, Toyman and Brainiac. Only two of these people were extraterrestrials to begin with. I don't know where they get the whole cosmic reaches of the universe. And when they got to Challenge of the Super Friends, they lost their goddamn minds in the writing pit. There was absolutely no rhyme or reason to why anything in this show happened. They had what the characters looked like, and they kind of had the characters' mentalities down. But then they came up with these plans. Okay, I got a tangent for a second. As a writer myself, as particularly when I write role-playing games, I write plots, I write schemes, I write adventures, I write random generators for villains to come up with plots on. I believe in villain-based plotting, which means that when I'm writing an adventure, I know what the bad guy is doing. The bad guy has a scheme, and if your bad guy's scheme isn't a good scheme, then the villain-based plotting breaks down. Villain's got a crappy plot, you have a crappy adventure. The Legion of Doom in Challenge of the Super Friends couldn't come up with a good plot if you handed them a good plot and stapled it to them. Taking over the Justice League satellite and using it to turn everyone on Earth into clones of Bizarro and Cheetah isn't a good plan. Because then, what did they do? They had all the clones of Bizarro and Cheetah get all the money on Earth and bring it to the Hall of Doom. Let's break that down for a second, shall we? Because, let's just break that down for a second. You have suddenly transformed everyone on Earth into a mentally challenged, reversed version of Superman with all of his strength and a opposite morality and a really, really skilled cat-themed burglar. Cheetah didn't really have any more defined powers, particularly in this show. She could occasionally use a whip. She had claws that could scratch things, but it was all obviously all costume. So one, if you are a fan of Larry Niven, you will recognize the title of his treatise on Superman mating, entitled Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex, where he describes why Superman and Lois Lane could never actually have intimacy because Lois Lane would end up gutted because Superman's really, really strong and Lois is made of stuff less tough than what he can break just by thinking about it. So you have automatically turned everyone on Earth into people who can't mate. Straight up. Right there. Bizarro and Cheetah cannot have any more successful intimate relations than Superman and Lois. So everyone on Earth can now not procreate successfully. 2. Everyone on Earth does everything you say because you are in command of these clones of Bizarro and Cheetah, despite the fact that Bizarro and Cheetah never showed more loyalty to the rest of the Legion of Doom than anyone else. The clones, for some reason, obey everything you say. Fine. So you get them to bring you all of the Earth's money. Why, if everyone on Earth is someone who does whatever you say, you already have all the Earth's money. You don't need any money. You say, I want that, and it's yours. You no longer have to pay for real estate or income tax or food or bubble gum. You just tell Bizarro or Cheetah behind the counter that you're taking that, and they say something like yes, and you have your stuff. Literally, the only reason to have them bring you all the money in the world is so that you can roll in it, but it is now worthless because money only matters if you have to give it to people for them to give you something back. In short, this plan was based on absolutely no thought or of how the Earth actually works, or economics, or finances, or government, or anything, but rather based on what the animators really enjoy drawing. I can only assume. If you can create clones of people like that, why not just mind control? Makes no sense. Makes no sense. And that's one of the least mentally insulting scripts that they had for Challenge of the Super Friends. I remember one episode in particular where Toyman, his powers, he has toys. He likes toys and he has them. He can presumably make his own toys. Toyman. That's it. That is their supervillain. They have a guy who can make toys. So, he traps Black Vulcan, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern in a black hole. He has created a black hole and has created a planet in the middle of the black hole with gravity so high that the power heroes cannot use their powers, and yet he has created giant toys there to entrap and torment them. If you are capable of generating a black hole, creating mass within that hole, and modifying that mass to be giant pinball games or doll houses with robot dolls that chase people around, what are you doing hanging with the rest of the losers in the Legion of Doom? Why don't you already own your own kingdom or star-spanning empire with this incredible power you have to generate mass and control it in the middle of a black hole? You could solve any problem of available energy or space travel or resources with the snap of a finger with that kind of power, which you get by being able to make toys. I know people who can make toys. I have not seen any of them create a black hole yet. The end of every episode of Challenge of the Super Friends was the same as well, and was more insulting than any other thing that they did in the show. The end of every episode was, the Legion of Doom has done these terrible things, almost destroyed the Earth, turned everyone on Earth into Bizarro and Cheetah clones, and then had them changed back. Any one of a dozen different horrible things, turn into giants and move all of the stuff on Earth, or the monuments on Earth around, so the Super Friends had to also turn themselves into giants to move it back. At the end of every episode, the Legion of Doom gets away. Luthor had one more device that could teleport them away back to the Legion of Doom. Or Sinestro is able to use his ring to get everyone out of the prison that they've been put into and send them away. And the Justice League of America, these Super Friends, say something to themselves to the effect of, should we go after them? No, we don't have to go after them, because the next time they show up, we'll stop them and we'll catch them. See, as a game master and a writer of role-playing games, if I throw some villains out there who threaten the entire Earth time and time again, and the player characters have got them in a cage, I don't care what alignment is on the character sheets or what kind of flaws those characters have that force them to be good with the process of justice. Each and every single one of those bad guys is getting 2 in the back of the head and a burial in an unmarked grave. No player character, no character in reasonable fiction is going to not go after those villains with everything they've got to bring them back and lock them up and make sure that justice happens. Because justice is a thing. Justice League of America, Hall of Justice, not the Hall of let them go so they can do this again and we'll try again next time. It's a long name for a hall. Challenge of the Super Friends, as popular as it was, lasted a season till 1979. Now, when I say season, they could make 20, 30 episodes in a season, and at the time they just pumped them out as hard as they could. There are a lot of episodes of these, but all of them had the same crippling problems. That the plots didn't make any sense. The superheroes became incredibly stupid when it came to falling into traps laid by the villains. The villains didn't have an end game. They had a plan where they would do something that the writers thought was cool, and then they'd get beaten and escape. 1979 to 1980, the show became the world's greatest Super Friends, and it started to compile things from different series and throw a few things from second season and challenge the Super Friends and pack them all together. The roster got trimmed back a little bit, but every so often there'd be special characters, and here's where they lost their damn minds. Here's where they really lost their damn minds. My friend Victor Gibson, my friend and co-author, and I were watching some Boomerang back when it was good. Had Super Friends on at night and said, hey, let's watch some Super Friends. We saw an episode we could not friggin' believe. Could not believe actually happened. Some divers and scientists go down to the Titanic to explore the wreck on a historical date after its sinking, and they disappear. They vanish. We do not know what happened to them. So Aquaman gets called because it's an ocean thing. Okay. Aquaman gets Black Vulcan, the electricity-based superhero, to go underwater with him. First writing problem. They go down and find that there are no scientists in the Titanic. There are just pulpy growths that look like scientists. So scientists did go down because someone called Aquaman, and the Titanic has grown pulpy scientist in diving suit shaped growths to fool people into going in after them. We don't know what happened to the scientists. They're never actually mentioned again. Oh, these are decoys. It gets worse. Because there is some radioactive stuff around the Titanic grows eyes, and the rip in its hull, where the iceberg crashed into it, becomes a mouth. And the Titanic rises to the surface of the ocean and starts running around the ocean, crashing into lighthouses. For no reason. There's just, and then lighthouse, and Aquaman and Black Vulcan can't seem to catch it in time or get in front of it. It's too powerful. It's the Titanic. Nothing can stop that. And it uses its tear maw and glowing red eyes, and it roars and starts eating lighthouses until Aquaman has, okay. Historians, I'm sorry, I have to say how the episode ends. Aquaman has some whales push an iceberg in the path of the Titanic. So the Titanic hits the iceberg and sinks all over again on exactly the same spot where the Titanic first sank. Nick and I look at each other and it's like, it cannot get worse than that. That's it. That's as bad as it can get. Oh my God, we were wrong. Oh my God, we watched on subsequent nights. The next time. There are some astronauts up on the moon. One of them looks at his instruments and goes, we've been wrong all along. The moon's actually hollow. At which point, the moon starts to split in half. Doctor Who fans, you may recognize this plot. I think this may be where they got it from. The moon breaks in half and a giant monster comes out of the moon because the moon was really an egg. And the giant monster heads towards the Earth, and the Super Friends all try and stop it, and it's too big. It's the moon monster. Oh no, it's the moon monster. Never mind any of the physics behind what is going on now. Never mind the thing that was actually giving the moon mass, moving closer to the Earth, and tidal waves and earthquake. No, the Super Friends trying to beat this thing up until Apache Chief, whose power is to grow when he says Inekchuk, says Inekchuk a whole bunch of times. Inekchuk! Inekchuk! Getting bigger every time until he's big enough to wrestle with the moon monster and throw it back into the moon. We do not know where Apache Chief's additional mass comes from, but if he is as big as the thing that is giving the moon mass, and he suddenly shows up standing on the Earth, so they throw the moon monster back into the moon, and Superman welds the moon back together with his heat vision. Good thing it broke clean in half. Didn't know that the moon worked that way. Superman's heat vision could do absolutely, and Superman could do absolutely anything he needed to do. He could rub his hands together and make tractors fly. Thanks, Sean, baby. Um, Nothing, no idea what happened to the astronauts. Their super friends probably saved them, but again, it's like the divers in the Titanic episode. Oh, well, stuff happens. And apparently the moon monster just went back to sleep when they sealed him back in the moon because there was no astronauts up there saying that the moon was hollow, so it didn't have to hatch again. And Vic and I look at each other and sigh, and that's as bad as it can possibly get. Then there is Planet of the Gleeks, where, okay, I've talked about Zan and Jaina, the Wonder Twins, and their blue space monkey, Gleek, who can talk like a monkey, really likes bananas, is a little bit smarter than your average monkey because he can do Deus Ex Machina things every so often, and has a tail that gets really, really, really long. He talks in monkey skitters at best. And that's it. That's all you get out of Gleek. Apparently, there is an entire civilization of these monkeys who can actually talk. They come to Earth and defeat the Super Friends. A civilization of blue monkeys comes to Earth and defeats the Super Friends. An advanced civilization of blue space monkeys comes to Earth and defeats the Super Friends. Batman, Robin, Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Green Lantern, all of them. Nope, blue space monkeys, you're done. And they can talk. They can talk just fine. Apparently, Gleek has a speech impediment or something. So, all the Super Friends defeated. Who saves the day? Gleek. The space monkey who can't talk saves the day. The Titanic, the Hollow Moon, Planet of the Gleeks. You don't have to watch episodes of the Super Friends for very long to get a sense of how bad the writing could be at times. When Gorilla Grodd takes over Gorilla City by using the horrible chemical beryllium sulfide, you get that sense that they were just writing scripts to be writing scripts. When I saw a very special screening of Transformers the movie and G.I. Joe the movie, which included panels by the people who wrote a lot of these cartoons, a lot of the animations that I grew up with. They explained the writing process as being active and frenetic and hectic and actively like like a freight train with 52 cars is leaving the station, and you have to get something in all of those cars as it goes out. So they were just throwing ideas into these scripts, and they didn't have to make sense. It was superhero stuff. It was comic book things. It didn't have to obey physics or be good. And I think this is why I like Bad Things, because that made it onto my television screen. The words beryllium sulfide were spoken by an actor who read those lines. An animator made an evil gorilla say those words as spoken by those actors, as written on that script, and it came to my ears through the television because a studio bought that and presented it to me. Beryllium sulfide. You can find beryllium on the periodic table. And it's not even in the upper 90s. Now that's... There is no element gorilla. And you don't have to go too far to realize that there is no gorilla element. My world came cascading down when I was watching an episode of the old live action Adam West Batman series. I was young. I was in that age where fiction and reality tended to blend, and I didn't really know that there wasn't really a Batman. Uh, and the Adam West series was where a number of my personal preferences, and dare I say a couple of fetishes, came from. But there's one episode where even my young mind couldn't keep up. The Joker had made robots that looked like people and had them doing things like being bank tellers and servers around town so that he could commit crimes with them. And Batman had captured one of these robots. The Joker was using a homing device in the robot to track them back to the Batcave, which would have been catastrophic, obviously. The Joker, knowing where Batman has the Batcave, realizing there might have been a problem with the robot, Batman instructs Robin to activate the anti-Joker robot homing device scrambler. Robin reaches forward, and on the dashboard of the friggin' Batmobile is a button with a well-printed label over it, which reads, Anti-Joker Robot Homing Device Scrambler. And it hit me so hard that even my young, ready to absorb all of this as fact or fantasy doesn't matter, I went, nah, no, wait. There's no way that could actually have been a thing because you had the no. I watched the Super Friends with the fervor of a young mind who wanted it all to be real, who wanted the Super Friends to be my friends, who wanted to be a Wendy or a Marvin or a Wonder Dog there with associating with these superpower characters. You know, it's what those characters were there for to begin with, so that the young viewer had something to associate with. And then this cognitive dissonance hit me. You know, reality. The Batman show was supposed to show stuff like that. It was high camp at best. And it really, really played it up a lot. Going back and watching it now, it's so funny because it was so camp. At the time, when I was a kid, no, that was serious stuff. That was real. When Colonel Klink poked his head out of one of the windows while Batman and Robin are climbing, that was transformative. Oh my God. Colonel Klink is in Batman? Does that mean that Hogan's in there too somewhere? The crossover possibilities almost shorted out my young mind. Now I see Werner Klemper guest starring on Batman and Robin for a cheap cross-promotional stunt, and it's still funny as hell. But it doesn't break me. Seeing the effort that went into Super Friends, the animation effort, the voice acting was excellent. Was some of the best voice acting that still to this day, because they got those scripts and they had to read them like they were words that people would say. Someone saw on a script the words beryllium sulfide and played their hearts out, making me believe that that existed. Knowing some of those voice actors, I can't imagine that there wasn't some creative license going on while they were describing what they thought about reading that line, but they read it. I can't write anything worse than beryllium sulfide. I can't write something worse than the Titanic coming to life and crashing into an iceberg. Not unless I'm trying to write something worse. I mean, I can write bad stuff if I choose to. But the standards that I've been given by literature and comic books and television, even the Super Friends, I can't aim that low. So I like terrible things. I like watching terrible things. I like enjoying terrible movies or occasionally reading a bad book or a bad comic book. Lord knows there's been, unfortunately, too many of those lately. I enjoy watching a comic book company crash and burn when they try and reimagine themselves or build themselves up into a new thing. Because that's the example I've been given. I've been given from a very young age. Crash and burn. I've been given Robot Jox crash and burn. I mean, quick note. Robot Jox was the first movie I took my wife to when we were dating. And she still married me. Look it up sometimes. The Cinema Snob does a really good review on it. It's Super Friends terrible. I have that standard loaded up here now. Oh, that might be bad. Is it beryllium sulfide bad? Or is it Titanic coming to life and eating lighthouses bad? You can have a perfect movie. It's hard to achieve, but theoretically, you could have a perfect movie. It's not a kind of movie I'd probably like to see because there'd be all this drama and a lack of Muppets and explosions in it. But once you hit that 10, that perfect, that pinnacle, that movie that is so good that it's everything a movie is supposed to be, that's it. That's as far as it goes. That's the top. But there are no limits to how many different levels of the bottom of movie making there are. You know, hold a gun to my head and ask me if I'm going to watch an entire day of Uwe Boll or an entire day of Roger Corman. I can't make that decision. You know, I might say, what the fuck? Let's watch some Ed Wood. Blood Rain or Sharknado or, ooh, how about Glenn or Glenda? There are so many different flavors and strata of bad. It's got a whole different set of connotations to anything that people might consider good. A good movie is somewhat bland to me. It can have the most perfect chase scenes and the most perfect fights choreography, and it won't. Or the best special effects and the greatest writing. Oh gosh, I've seen some very well written films, and I've really enjoyed knowing that they were well written films, and I've really hated watching them because well written is smooth and lifelike and nothing that I go to the movies for. I occasionally need to see a linguistic train wreck. I need to see Tor Johnson and Vampira from time to time. I need that depth, that strata of bad that the Super Friends gave me. There were worse cartoons than the Super Friends, do not get me wrong. The Super Friends won awards, as it should have, because it was a persistent presence of entertainment appropriate to the children who watched it. Like I said, at the time when I was watching it, I didn't know I was watching bad entertainment. I was watching entertainment that was pointed at me, and I appreciated that. I really did. I appreciated it far more than the shows of the 80s that came out specifically to insult my intelligence. I appreciated it so much more than the Gary Coleman Show or Rubik's Cube, Rubik, the Amazing Cube, or, oh gosh, I said the Gary Coleman Show, so I can't go down too much further. But the Super Friends, upon reflection, does give me this spectrum of bad. And when I studied web design, I studied web design from a book called Websites That Suck, and its companion book, Son of Websites That Suck, Learning Good Design by Studying Bad Design. That's a better education than most of the other HTML books I've dug into, because if you studied how people have done it wrong, you know how to do it well. You know what you don't do. And sometimes you're tempted to do those things. Is this a good idea? And you see someone else having done it, and you go, no, that's not a good idea. I learned everything I know about writing role-playing games by reading bad role-playing games. I got a shelf full of them here in alphabetical order, thanks to my personal assistant. I know what not to do in a role playing game because people have done it and I've read it and I've gone, oh my god, this is the planet of the Gleeks of role playing games. This is beryllium sulfide bad. I don't think of it as setting a low bar. I think of it as having taught me what that standard is and encouraging me to throw myself at it because once you understand how bad it gets, unless you're trying, you can't do worse. One of these days, I'll talk about the bad role playing games. In the meantime, I'll probably spend some time talking about mine. So until next time, I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. I'll talk to you next time on Matters of Decorum.